Hi, everyone. So I'd love to welcome our panelists. We have Carina Bischof, who is co-founder of Fashion Revolution Germany, which is a non-profit activist research and advocacy organization. We have Liz Ricketts, who is co-founder and executive director of the OR Foundation, which is a Ghana-based non-profit that operates at the intersection of environmental justice, education, and fashion development, all very important topics. And Sarah Blank, who is a consultant at Löning, a management consultancy specializing in human rights. Thank you, guys. So, like Anne said, for the second panel of today, we're going to be discussing human rights in fashion supply chains and design processes. When I was thinking about how to approach this topic and talk about it with you all, I was trying to think of a way to make it light and approachable. But also, I think it is really important to emphasize that this is a really serious topic, and really, since humans have existed, we have treated people pretty badly, right? And in fashion, this might look like everything from how we're treating the intern to things like taking wages from garment workers to even sourcing in regions where there is genocide and ethnic cleansing. So there's a real range. My personal opinion is that often when we treat people badly, it's because we forget that they're people. I think we see this a lot in the fashion industry as well. There are a lot of industries where we're driven by money rather than actually sitting down and realizing that there are people in the end of this. So when we see people as the other, we're able to detach and kind of have this sense of apathy about what happens to them. So I hope that you do leave today feeling reminded that we care about what happens to people in this industry, and also feeling hopeful about how we help them. And throughout today's discussion, we'll be talking about what brands, big and small, can do to uphold workers' human rights. We'll be unpicking how upcoming EU legislation is shaping how brands report on human rights, and also talk about how to ensure that genuine impact is delivered through these legislations. Sarah, I want to come to you first. Could you explain, I know I mentioned a couple of those points, but what are some of the ways in which we do see human rights violations coming up in the fashion industry?
I mean, there are various examples for this. I mean, the fashion industry, the human rights issues have been around for a couple of years now, and I think it's very common to know the common human rights violations occurring in textile supply chains. So when you're having a look at Tier 1, which is where companies target their most measures on, there's a lot of going on with living wages, for example, which is very well known also in the society, but also when you talk about, for example, child labor, you have the deeper you go into the tiers, the more child labor you will find until you're on the cotton field. And yeah, also for, how do you say, the whole union thing, like, no, I'm saying the word perfect.
Trade unions?
Trade unions, like collective bargaining and things like that. That's always also an issue, especially in certain countries. For example, Sri Lanka is really big when it comes to union busting. So those are a couple of things that pop up, and lately, I mean, what was very big in the media was also for the use of forced labor, especially the state-induced use of forced labor. So, I mean, you have a broad range. So everything you can think about human rights violations happens in the textile supply chain, and one tier or the other. And also what you just mentioned at the very beginning, also in the corporations itself, they struggle sometimes a little bit with human rights. I mean, not on that big scale or not in the severity like this, but it is very, you can find it everywhere in the fashion industry.
For anyone who doesn't know, what are those tiers?
Tiers are production steps in the textile supply chain. So, for example, tier 1 is usually it's about finishing goods, so putting them together, and then the last tier is where the raw material is from, for example, a cotton field.
Okay, cool. And those human rights violations can happen all throughout, right? It's not just the garment workers, and it's not just
right. So it's spinning, it's garment workers, it's the cotton fields, it's everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's a big issue then. It's literally happening everywhere. And fashion obviously isn't the only industry where it's happening, of course. And so what are actually some of the barriers to implementing, or I guess to expand on that point, Liz, could you kind of explain how human rights issues also persist even after the garment has been created and sold?
Of course. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. And thank you, Sarah, for explaining those tiers, because I think it's really important. You know, I'm sure everyone here is familiar with the circular economy. We want to transition from linear to circular, which means that we're extending our supply chain. So I work in a tier that is not yet named, which is the post-consumer phase of the life cycle. And I think it's really important to first ground it in the fact that overproduction and waste is only profitable because of the exploitation that happens along the entire value chain. So everything that Sarah just talked about, and the fact that, yes, we have disposable products because we treat people as if they are disposable. And so what ends up happening is that we have this business model of fast fashion, which we define as volumes over value. There's not enough value left in the products anymore, and we're overproducing them. So people wear them for a short period of time, donate them, maybe here in Germany, and they end up in places in the global south, such as Ghana. But the problem is that even though Ghana has the skill set to upcycle and to repair and to resell many of these garments, again, because the value of fast fashion has dipped so much, there's no longer enough embedded value in the garments for it to be worth it for them to resell. And so what we end up having is a debt crisis that drives a waste crisis. So what I mean by that is that retailers in Kantaman, so it's the largest secondhand clothing market in the world. It's in Ghana, where I work. They buy these bales of secondhand clothes, they open them, and about 40% of it ends up being unsold and will leave the market as waste. But the other challenge is that because the products have been cheapened, it requires an increase in cheap labor to make this economy possible. And so there's a group of women in Ghana, unfortunately, that carry the burden of that. And they're called kayeye. It's a term that means she who carries the burden. And these are female headquarters who are anywhere from the age of 6 years old to 30 years old. And what they do is they transport the clothing bales throughout the market. These clothing bales weigh 55 kilograms. So they're transporting these bales on their heads, sometimes 10 trips a day, over a kilometer. And it is backbreaking work, and it can be fatal. Sometimes their necks break under the weight of these bales. And the reason that happens, again, is because there's no other way to move the clothing throughout the market, but it's because essentially fast fashion has driven down the value of clothing overall, but it requires these forms of labor to move the materials. And so I think the cascading effects of not paying garment workers a living wage is that we have these products that no one really wants or knows how to recirculate.
We've talked a lot about fast fashion just there, but we're obviously at Berlin Fashion Week right now, and a lot of the brands showing right now are of that sort of premium or luxury price point. I think that probably one of the fallacies that we saw, you know, whether it was 10 years ago or whatever, was that, oh, well, we're luxury brands, therefore none of it is wasteful because it's all, you know, higher price and people want this stuff and it's not going to be thrown out. But where would you say that luxury brands are kind of culpable within this waste crisis?
I would say, luxury brands are still overproducing and also driving trend and manufacturing demands. So I think, my background is in the luxury fashion industry. I was a designer and a stylist and used to work on film sets and had a very different life. And I saw the shift towards fast fashion. And even if the price point is much higher than fast fashion, the reality is that luxury companies are functioning at a very fast pace. We went from 2 seasons a year to 5, now monthly, weekly drops. And it requires a marketing apparatus that has come between the creative and the consumer in a way that makes it very, very difficult, I think, to educate and to convey the true value of the products that are being made. So there's a lack of honesty, I think, in the luxury industry.
Carina, where would you say that brands are at in terms of being open and transparent about everything that's happening in their supply chains and design processes, particularly when it comes to how they're treating people in those processes?
Yeah, so the fashion revolution movement started with a Rana Plaza accident back in 2013. In that time, it was not clear which brands were actually producing at Rana Plaza. So the people were digging in the piles of clothing in order to find out who actually produced there. And after this, Fashion Revolution, they started with the Fashion Transparency Index, and they ranked around 250 of the world's biggest fashion brands. They ranked them and they reviewed them according to their social and environmental aspects. So we have a good overview. It's now the 8th year. 2013 was launched the last.
What happened in Rana Plaza, for anyone who doesn't know?
And in Rana Plaza was and still one of the biggest industry disasters, where the complex building of Rana Plaza, this was just crashing down in minutes, and over 1,300 people were dying, and loads of more were injured, and they still suffer from this accident. This is one, and it was more the tip of the iceberg. And in the meantime, there were different other accidents happening, so we still need to do a lot. There is progress in terms of safety, and the buildings are built up safer, but the transparency transparency issue is still there, and we still need to find out more about where our clothes produced, and that's what Fashion Revolution does. So it's not just not just a movement for the civil society. We talk also to politicians and also wake up brands, and with a simple question about who made my clothes and what's in my fabric, you can achieve already a kind of like wake up call, I would say.
Yeah. And so a lot of the upcoming EU legislations are related to this topic of transparency, right? Getting brands to report on who made their clothes and what the clothes are made of. Sarah, could you explain what are some of the sort of prevalent EU legislations or policies that are coming up that brands you work with have their eyes on?
Yeah, sure. So a lot is currently happening on EU level. So, and I think one of the major legislations that brands should keep an eye on is the CSDDD, so the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which actually obliges member states of the European Union to implement mandatory requirements for companies within scope of the CSDDD to identify and assess, address adverse human rights and environmental impact. So this is kind of comparable to what we're doing currently in Germany with the German Supply Chain Act. And after a lengthy period of political debate, the CSDDD was finally adopted earlier this year. And now the member states have to translate it into national law. But I think that brands definitely should keep up with the process there, because as soon as they know what's going to happen or what the law is going to say in the respective member state, they should get started on it, because this is something we learned from advising clients also with the German Supply Chain Act. It's very complex, and really getting to the bottom of the implementation of this law is, it takes time, and you better be prepared as a brand.
Yeah.
And another one is obviously the CSRD, which is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which basically obliges companies to report on their ESG activities. And the reported information also needs assurance. And what's especially interesting here is that companies have to identify the sustainability matters that matter the most to them, but not only from their perspective, but also from a stakeholder perspective. So you have an inside out and an outside in perspective here. And for fashion brands, especially, the topic of human rights will be there. So you can expect brands to have more, reporting information on human rights also here.
Within these directives, so with human rights as the focus, what are some of the ways that brands might have to either report or track or anything to do with human rights in these sort of policies?
So the CSDDD is more linked to implementing actual measures. Okay. So according to the United Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, there's a whole system behind it. That you have to build up a risk management process to address the most salient human rights issues in your supply chain. And the CSEE is really more about reporting, but what this whole reporting also has as an effect is that companies have to question how their strategy is working, how they are going to gather data, and how they are going to develop, for example, processes to get access to the data. So it also has a very much process-like effect on companies.
And with, when a brand's going about this, what are some of the barriers to actually implementing this in practice, either on the brand side or also for the suppliers that they're working with?
Depends on. So, of course, you're dependent on your suppliers because you need the data. But for the legislations, the part of the responsibility is on the brand. But of course, they have to involve the suppliers as well because this is where, everything happens, and also they have to have access to deeper supply chain steps, which are usually more linked to the supplier than the brand itself. So. Basically.
Yeah. Do these apply to all brands, or is it mainly just the big sort of multinational brands that are having to do this?
So both legislation I just mentioned apply to bigger brands. So for the CSEE, there are different thresholds. So it goes to 1,000 employees and 450 million turnover. So that's the lowest bar, and it will come into effect gradually. So we start with 5,000 employees and a much higher turnover, I think 1,500 million.
Right.
It's like that. And for the CSRD, it is a little bit more complicated because they have 3 criterion. And 2, you have to fulfill to be in scope of the CSRD, but I'm not sure if this is maybe also out of place right now to explain it in more detail. But yeah, it's mainly for the CSEE, it's bigger corporations, but CSRD, the bar is a little bit lower.
Okay, so anyone who wants more details is going to come and talk to Sarah after. But okay, so that's obviously the big brand side, but what I find really encouraging was I did a talk with some students a while ago, actually, for the Fashion Council Germany, and a lot of their questions were, okay, how am I tracing supply chains? How do I make sure that I'm being ethical? So I think a lot of smaller brands that are coming up right now do really care about this, and they want to make sure that they're starting off on the right foot, which is a lot easier than retroactively trying to figure out the data and be like, oh, wait, we treated our suppliers so badly, and now we want all this data from them. That's going to be an issue. So I think small brands have their eyes on that, but Carina, you mentioned who made my clothes and what are my clothes made of. Would you say those, I guess, what are the biggest questions or points that smaller brands can be looking into when they're setting up their supply chain to make sure that people are being treated well?
Yeah, I just wanted also to complete maybe the transparency index part before, because so what's ranked and reviewed with the 250 brands is showing also the information they disclose on their website. So what are they making transparent to the outside? So if you want to inform yourself, is it possible at all? And there we are still at a point, I think around 70 brands out of the 250, they have less than 10% what they give to the outside publicly. And they're for the first time, 2 brands were ranked over 80%. But there's still a lot to do. And I'm not sure if it's sometimes it sounds easier if you start from scratch to make everything right, but then the money is also missing because you are such a small brand. You start with 1 person or maybe 2, 3, and then you need to have all of the different topics from the material sourcing up to how is packaging in the end. You have to keep in mind, and you need to advertise, you do the marketing. It's really hard to make everything right. I also had my own upcycling brand, and I founded the first upcycling fashion store here in Berlin. I know what it means for the brand, and we were a team of 4 starting in that time. If I talk now to people and they say that they start their own label, then I would love to give them so much advice, because it is really a hard job to do everything right. You can just do partly right. For me, it was meaning that we didn't want to produce any new fabrics. So this was and is still, I think, the best decision to start with the material sourcing and really think about the material and the quantities. What do you actually want to sell? Because if it's not sold, then it will most probably end up in Ghana or in other countries where we bring our clothes. So, and this is also linked to the awareness of the people buying our clothes and making them really like attracted to the brand. So if you define yourself with a young designer's brand, and then you will also communicate about it, and then you will think twice if you throw it away in the end or not.
Yeah. Liz, could you also explain, so first of all, what is EPR? That's something that we were talking about yesterday. And then secondly, how might EPR change the way that we design?
Absolutely. So extended producer responsibility, probably more of you know what it is than many other rooms because it originated here in Germany in the 90s. Essentially, it's a tax that brands pay to cover the cost of waste management for their products. There's only one policy for textiles currently, and that's in France. And from our perspective, it's not a very effective policy because brands are only paying around a penny per garment, which does not internalize the true cost of waste management. And it also does not deter a larger brand from overproducing. But then the larger concern for us is that these policies are not actually extending to the true end of life. So what happens in France is they collect around 34% of the clothing that's put on the market, but 80% of that is exported to the global south, to countries like Togo and Haiti and Ghana in my case. And most of the work that is done to actually manage that waste happens there. But all of the money that the brands pay stays in France. So from our perspective, this essentially codified waste colonialism and created a further divide. So we are here advocating for these policies to become globally accountable, meaning that resources, as long as brands are paying this fee, resources should be shared with the communities that actually end up doing the work to manage the waste. And we know that it's not going to happen anytime soon. I'm very happy that there's the ambition for Europe to manage its own waste, but it's simply not feasible. If Europe needs 150 of its own recycling plants to manage its own waste, that's going to take some time. So if we can be honest and admit that Europe is going to continue to rely on the global south to manage its waste, then we should share those resources. But then in terms of design, also very important is how we eco-modulate the fees that brands pay. So right now in France, most brands receive a bonus. They receive money back when they produce clothing out of polyester, actually, because polyester is considered durable, and it is. If you take it into a lab and you compare polyester to cotton, of course, polyester is more durable and will last longer. But from our perspective, we do microfiber research. We'll be publishing a report in September. Basically, the headline of that is that there is 100 times more microfiber pollution in Accra than has ever been documented anywhere in the world. It's making its way into people's bodies and into the food system. And it will be very difficult to clean up this level of pollution. So from our perspective, we need these fees to equate to the true cost of cleaning up this legacy of material. And I think that will really help us to design healthier garments from the start that can be decomposed and properly cycled within the circular economy that we have.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? It's like we need to make clothing that is durable enough to last if someone wants to keep it a lifetime. If they don't want to keep it a lifetime, we need to make sure it's not so durable that it won't biodegrade or whatever. Right?
Exactly.
All the plastic clothing that I bought when I was a teenager is probably it's definitely still out there in the world and will be there until I'm dead. That's the horrible reality of it. It's this really interesting kind of thing that I think a lot of smaller brands as well are having to deal with.
There's a difference between durability and persistence.
Right. Yeah. And we were also talking last night about the difference between amplifying voices and speaking over or for people. Could you tell me a little bit more about how do we actually involve some of these communities that you're working with in the decision-making process so that these issues or kind of missteps don't continue to happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think first you have to invite people. There's a lot of research commissioned in the global north on the secondhand clothing trade in the global south, but it's not people actually living in places like Ghana are not invited to lead that research or to participate in it. So first is that there has to be an invitation. Second is that you have to do the work of actually bringing people into the conversation, and that's not easy. So I'm here with a delegation of Ghanaian colleagues, including a representative from the Accra Metropolitan Assembly. They're out visiting upcyclers right now. They're not here in the room, but making it possible so that my Ghanaian colleagues can travel to Europe is a task in and of itself. Right, I'm American, I have an American passport, I can go anywhere I want, and no one asked me to show how much money I have, and no one asked me what I'm doing there, but for my Ghanaian colleagues, it's very difficult for us to get visas to travel. And so I think policymakers, brands, you have to be willing to go that extra step, and you have to understand that it's not just clicking a button, right? If you are committed to being inclusive and bringing people into the conversation, you have to set aside time and resources to make sure that's possible. You also have to invest in translating content. I think that's one of the biggest barriers for people to be involved in policymakers is language, and not just the language that things are written in, but the phrases that we use, the industry lingo that we use, that is not easily broken down or made accessible. And then second, it's not just enough to involve people as like a check the box. I had this Zoom call with people from this community, and that's done. My stakeholder engagement is done. You need to involve people along the entire process, update them when the policies are being reviewed, but then also include them in the enforcement of the policy. So this is another area where I think extended producer responsibility policies need to change, where community members from Contamanto, for instance, where I work, should sit on the board of the Product Responsibility Organization alongside brands and other European NGOs to make sure that they're not just involved in setting up the policy, but actually enforcing it after the fact.
And Sarah, I want to also ask you, what do you think in terms of how you'd like these solutions that we're mentioning to be implemented in a way that is actually long-lasting and impactful?
I mean, stakeholder engagement, I can only second what Liz just said. Stakeholder engagement is a really crucial point where also brands have to really speed up their game, because this is something that runs short at the moment from my perspective, what I see. And to find sustainable solutions or long-lasting solutions is mainly about understanding what are the needs, where are the difficulties, why also measures do not work we already have in place to get an understanding of that. So that is one very crucial part. And on the other hand, it's not like only stakeholder engagement from a rights holder perspective, but also you need different kind of stakeholders to have long-lasting solutions, because I personally find you cannot find a solution only for brands or for on the policy making level. So it has to come all together. And within the textile or within the fashion industry, there are also very nice examples of multi-stakeholder initiatives that actually work. They bring people together and work on a certain topic, for example, wages. I think there are very good initiatives on wages. And yeah, basically this, from my perspective, is what it takes to come up with long-lasting solutions.
And then lastly, Carina, what would you say in terms of how we actually reach consumers to also kind of encourage them to change or even just reconsider their habits?
Yeah, so I think what was Fashion Revolution doing right from the beginning was talking in a simple and easy language. So these complex topics were broken down with this hashtag and then also question. And I think, yeah, it's for us a bit about also campaigning and doing a different approach. We work together with a lot of organizations, and it's really interesting to see because, for example, Femnet, Fair Trade, and then they do it already for a long time. But what Fashion Revolution campaign did, they were talking in the social media language, and they made it much easier and also fun for the consumers to ask and to dress yourself. It's not that we should be too serious in the end, and that's also why the campaign, sometimes in the beginning, they got some criticism, because they said, yeah, but it's such a deep topic, how can you be so light about it? But we want to have a low entry for everyone. So we try with the campaigns, with the languages, different. We are so connected in over 90 countries all over the world. And when there is Fashion Revolution Week here in Germany, there are around 30 cities really doing something and trying to engage with the consumers through clothing swaps, repair workshops, and we go into classes, we educate the students from the beginning on, so that if they understand, then they will bring it to their families and they will talk differently about the whole topic. And we, for example, in 2014, we set up a vending machine on the Alexanderplatz. It was the €2 t-shirt experiment, and this was attracting a lot of people coming out of Primark and the cheap clothing shops. They wanted to buy a €2 t-shirt. Then there was a film showing how the actual garment is produced, and in the end they were questioned, do you still want to buy the t-shirt, or do you want to donate the money and help the system to change? And it was a really interesting experiment, and also really eye-opening for me, because you see that you are still in your bubble and there's so much still to do. We started last year with the 1 hour shirt campaign, and this is a campaign where we are not selling like a t-shirt for a certain price. We sell it for like we say a t-shirt roundabout needs 1 hour to make. What is your hour worth? And then you buy the t-shirt actually for your hour, and it is for like a teacher different than for a student or for Elon Musk, for example. And we have the production price, which is going back to the company which produced it, to Bay City, and then all the rest is donated to 3 different projects. So it's a different way to get in touch with consumers.
Yeah, I think on the communication side, it's really interesting in terms of like how much shame should we use, right? Like, is a healthy dose of shame okay?
Yeah.
Or does that, I mean, some people, I think it maybe depends on your personality, just end up digging their feet in further and be like, no, well, this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
What do you think? Or anyone else on the panel?
I think it won't achieve the mainstream if we are with our like rules from the top. We need to talk to the language of the people, and this is right now it's ultra fast fashion, so it's a different language we still need to learn. I think also at the Fashion Revolution, it's just so quick. How can you give out this information so quick? Because
Yeah, I guess there's parallels with, you know, how we're treating people in the supply chain, and also people that we want to change their minds, right? If you go in with empathy, that's often a good place to start.
Yeah.
I think this is probably a good place to end, actually. Thank you so much. Do we have time for questions? No? Okay, I think that's it then. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone.